Hey, I was just gonna. Whoa. Are you okay? You look really rough. Wait, you're sick? Well, here, let me see. Do you have a fever? Yeah, you definitely do. Have you taken any medicine yet? Okay, good. How long ago was that? I'm gonna set a timer on my phone so that you know when you need to take more. Look, just because we don't always get along doesn't mean I'm happy to see you sick. Oh, right. I was about to tell you I was gonna run to the store. I was gonna ask if you needed it or wanted anything. It's fine though. I'll just have the groceries delivered. I'm not leaving you home alone. Especially not when you're this sick. Is there anything I can do to help? Look, I don't care how stupid or silly you think it is. If it's gonna help you feel better, I'll do it. Wait, are you for real? Little Miss I Can Take on the World wants me to read her a storybook? Oh, okay. That makes sense. Well, if it's your favorite fairy tale that Grandpa used to read to you, I mean, it makes total sense you'd want to hear it now. Ah, that's fine. I don't mind if the story's a little dark or sad. Where's the book? Over here? The one with the purple spine? Whoa! Why have I never seen this book before? The front's hand card leather. Yeah, there's fairies, elves, unicorns, and even dragons on it. No, this is beautiful. You're right. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm getting the book. I will come read it to you in a moment and not just admire the cover. Well, at least you feel good enough to still be sassy. I'd be way more worried about you if you weren't at least mouthing off a little bit. Just let me grab the chair from your desk and I'll come sit down. Or would you prefer I sit on the edge of the bed? Okay, you are definitely sick. I never thought in all my life I'd hear you ask to cuddle. No, no, I don't mind. It just caught me by surprise. Okay, what page is it on? 52. Okay. So it's the fairy and her dragon, right? Perfect. Then just cuddle up with me and I will read it to you. Once upon a day, many years ago, there was a beautiful young maiden. Although by the name of Fairy is how her kind is better known. While her beauty was renowned, she was not remarkable in any other way. It made her a poor choice for marriage, and so all potential suitors stayed away. She really did not mind. After all, it meant she would never have to leave her beloved garden behind. She did feel pain seeing the disappointment in both of her parents' eyes, for if she did not wed, there would be no grandchildren to be had. As a fairy, you are not expected to have many children. However, you are supposed to at least try to produce one. As she turned to her garden in all its splendor, the fluttering of wings caught her attention. Across the way, she saw a handsome young male fairy. He was going to knock on her best friend's door. She already recognized the beautiful flower crown he had in hand. When the door opened, her best friend's father stepped out. The young man asked her father something quietly. The older fairy looked down at the flower crown in the young man's hand. A slow, knowing smile curved across his lips. In one graceful, simultaneous movement, the older fairy closed his eyes and dipped his head in approval. The young man looked as if he was ready to leap for joy. Next, she heard her best friend's father call out in his warm, booming voice, "My sweet Petunia, there is a guest for you." Less than 2 minutes later, she saw her best friend come running to the door. When she saw the young man and the flower crown in his hand, her hands flew to her mouth. She nodded vigorously. The young man reached forward, gently placing the flower crown on top of her head. With that, she leapt, throwing her arms around him. This was the boy, her best friend had been hoping to marry. Because of the rules of the village, her best friend had not been allowed to say anything about her own feelings. Petalfall placed her hand over her chest. She had felt relief for her best friend. Petunia Meadows would finally get to join the Thicket family. She also felt a pang of sadness, knowing her friend would no longer be nearby. After all, the Thicket family was very influential. They usually didn't congregate with the common folk. She already knew and understood exactly why his family had agreed to allow him to marry Petunia. All of Petunia's family had given off many children. On top of that, each child had been smarter and more beautiful than the last. It's really no surprise why the influential family would want a girl like her. Despite her sorrow over most likely only ever getting to see her best friend in passing at all community gatherings, Petalfall was still thrilled for her best friend. After watching the happy couple disappear into the house, most likely to discuss marriage arrangements, she returned her attention to the garden. She knew after her parents heard the news, she would most likely be locked in her room again. Every time another fairy her age got betrothed, her parents would lock her in her room. They did this so that she could focus on ways to make herself better and more desirable as a future wife. She already knew this would never happen. There was nothing special about her. After all, fairies don't marry for love. They marry with a few different factors in mind. The first being a functional marriage that will lead to growth, both in personal gain as well as for the entire village. The second being the climbing of the social ladder. The third, powerful magic users who breed together to create the strongest magical offspring possible. The fourth, for brains and beauty. The fifth, political gains or agendas of the families. The sixth, occasionally these are to renew the bonds between multiple fairy villages. Or the seventh, attempting to gain access to rare or special abilities. Petalfall could not provide any of these to her future husband. While she was extremely beautiful, she was not especially bright. She was not particularly good with magic. She held no political power or social prowess. Having a green thumb just came with being a fairy. There was only one thing that had made her truly special, and it was something that she had hidden away her entire life. Even her own parents didn't know about her hidden gift. She had a rare and unique ability to understand the fairies' worst enemies. She could hear and understand dragons. She didn't know whether or not she was capable of speaking to them. To try would certainly be a death wish. After all, a dragon's favorite snacks are fairies. She had learned the rules about never getting too close to dragons before she ever had even seen one. She also learned that anyone who tried to study the beasts was instantly deemed a threat to the village. She didn't know exactly how it was done, but she was aware that these fairies were incapacitated and left bound in front of the dragon's dens as offerings. This was done in hopes that the beasts would not come hunting in the village. Sadly, most of the time it worked. This meant that the cruel and terrifying practice continued. At about 10 years old, she had encountered her first dragon. She hid amongst the bushes, praying to the morning star that it would not find her. When it got closer, she realized she could hear a voice. The beast was not trying to eat fairies. Instead, the giant fire-breathing monster was desperately looking for a specific type of herb. She could hear the terrified tremble in the large beast's voice. The dragon turned out to be a dragoness, who was desperately searching for herbs needed to help her sick dragonling. She kept repeating to herself those herbs were supposed to grow near the fairy village. Petalfall knew she had to act fast and quietly as possible. She knew the mother dragon's life, and therefore the lives of her babies, would be in danger if she stayed there too long. After all, the dragon extermination squadron would arrive to dispatch her. Petalfall knew exactly where the herbs the dragoness had named grew. As quickly and silently as possible, she crawled through the underbrush. She gathered each herb and put them in her basket. As soon as her entire basket was filled to the brim, she placed it at the opposite end of the clearing from the mother dragon. As soon as she was away from the basket, she threw a rock to attract the mother's attention back towards the basket. When the mother dragon turned around to defend herself, she stood there baffled. In a voice no fairy should have been able to understand, the mother dragon sang her thanks while grabbing the basket with her tail. She quickly took to the skies. Pedophile knew better than to come out of hiding too soon. She knew it would look suspicious. One of the warriors from the dragon extermination squadron found her still hiding in the underbrush. He told her it was safe and that he would help get her home. The squadron asked her a few questions about what the dragon had done. She explained she'd been picking a few of the herbs for making tea to try to grow them in her garden, that for some reason the dragon had stolen her basket. She discovered she played the part of a fool well. From that day onward, whenever she heard that there was a dragon nearby, she would try to listen for their voice. She eventually came to the conclusion that she could understand all dragons. She did not speak a word of this to anyone, not only for her sake, but theirs as well. Unfortunately, this would be the only special skill she could have offered a husband, so the likelihood of her ever getting married was less than 0. Sure enough, when her parents returned home that night, she endured the same punishment she knew she would. Rather than sit there moping over a problem she couldn't fix, she turned back to her books of medicine and remedies. She had a goal in mind. She wanted to become the best healer that would ever live. Her goal was to become a healer so fantastic that even dragons would seek out her assistance and therefore cause a measure of unity between the two groups. Her punishment this time stretched out much longer than she was used to. Not that she minded. After all, becoming the best healer to ever live takes a lot of time and practice. So rather than fret, she threw herself into her studies even harder. After about 3 weeks, from her account, her parents let her out of her room. She wasn't sure whether they just wanted her to be seen again in hopes of possibly winning a husband with her beauty, or whether they just got sick of bringing her food. Either way, she was relieved that her punishment was over. When she stepped outside, she was happy to discover her parents had tended the garden with their magic. She preferred to do everything by hand herself, but her parents preferred magic. The real punishment would have been to let her garden die, but it would have destroyed their reputation as fairies. One of the few things she was extremely grateful for in fairy culture. She discovered she had been released from her confinement just in time to watch her night bloomers. The back portion of the garden was all flowers that only bloom in moonlight. She decided to spend all afternoon and evening working in the garden until the moon rose to its highest point. So there she toiled away happily, for hours, in her beloved garden. When she looks back to see how the night bloomers are doing, she discovers that they are already wide open. Well then, I suppose I've earned myself a little break. She smiles broadly as she walks over to one of the most fragrant bushes. "Excuse me, may I sit with you?" she asks in a loving tone while giggling. She's well aware that the plant can't answer her, but talking to her favorite plants is something she's done ever since she was a child. She sits down, surrounded by the beautiful aroma of flowers that have opened to greet the moonlit sky. As she sits, she enjoys the night air. There's only a few small lanterns, the moonlight, the stars, and the faint glow of her wings lighting the garden. The sense of serenity is suddenly shattered as she hears shouting from a different part of the village. It isn't particularly far away, but it's still one of the higher-ranking areas. Just as she starts to wonder to herself what could be causing such a commotion, she hears a shout that causes an icy dagger to be run through her heart. "There's a baby dragon in the village. Quickly, kill it before it draws more of the beasts." These words alone are enough to make her feel sick. She quickly and quietly leaps to her feet. Flying would attract too much attention. Only warrior fairies fly when there's a possible dragon in the village. With that, she quickly runs off into the woods. She takes the long way around, so that she has the best chance of finding the dragon before they do, without being spotted. As she walks through the beautiful greenery, she hears something odd. It's like a tiny, trembling voice. Something not unlike that of a child. "Please, someone help me." She barely hears it, but she follows the tiny repeating voice. She continues to go as quickly and silently as her feet will allow. She knows she has to find it before it's too late. She cannot bring herself to think of what they'll do to an innocent child. Even if it is a dragon, it's too young to have done anything wrong. Eventually she comes across a beautiful blue and green baby dragon. She carefully and slowly crouches down so as not to scare the baby. "Hi, Pond Lily. It's okay now, I promise. I won't hurt you. I just want to help you get away from the people who are chasing you." Everything will be okay. It takes no time at all for the dragon child to dive straight into her arms. She quickly wraps her cloak around the baby and gets as far away from the area as she can, all the while knowing if she's caught, what would happen to her and the child. After a while, they end up stopping near a waterfall. Right as she's about to speak to the baby dragon, she hears the deafening toll of the bell ring throughout the village. That bell means the dragon has been vanquished. She looks down at the dragon in her arms. A few seconds later, she hears the bell toll once more. Tears start streaming down her face in realization of what has happened. The first bell ringing must have meant they vanquished the child's mother. The second was to say the other threat had been either eliminated or handled. Basically, they think disposing of the child's mother would scare it away. All she can do is stand there, holding the precious life she just managed to save, and yet doomed. Once she manages to recollect her thoughts, she decides that because she had saved this innocent little life, it was now her job to raise it. She knew most likely it would grow up to eat fairies, but right now it was an innocent child, nothing more and nothing less. She already knew she was never going to get to have any children of her own. This was her chance to raise a child. With that, she snuck the baby dragon home. Over the next 2 years, not much changed, other than her baby's size. The child had good self-control, and could even go long periods without large quantities of food. Never once did her child offer to bite her or try to eat her. The child would even help out in the garden whenever possible. Pond Lily was now roughly the size of a large wolf. Unfortunately, communication was not the two-way street she'd been hoping for. It seemed as if she could understand the dragon, but they could only understand her intentions, not her words. However, her and her child learned ways around this challenge. They had overcome many obstacles together, everything from random bursts of fire to scale fever. At this point, she was almost certain there was nothing they couldn't handle together. Pond Lily had even become an expert at digging holes, the exact right depth and size for her gardening, according to each plant's needs. Currently, Petalfall was serving another long punishment for failure to marry. This time she had been locked up for about 5 weeks. With no foreseeable end in sight, her and Pond Lily continued to study healing together. Over the last 2 years, Pond Lily had developed quite the admiration for his mother's dedication to becoming a healer. He would happily scurry about the room, getting her any supplies or books she needed. He was just happy to be helping her, and to be of use. The fact that each task completed properly resulted in some nice chin scratches didn't hurt either. As they lay on the floor together, she heard a noise. Before she has time to think or say anything, her bedroom door opens. Petalfall, your self-improvement inflection is, oh, what is that beast doing in my house? She quickly sits up and puts her baby behind her. She tries to do her best to block her father's view further. Father, I can explain. I promise. I have a good reason. She pleads with him to no avail. The next thing she knows, she hears shouting. She looks back at Pond Lily. The dragon is still too young to fly. Before she can turn around, she hears a loud thud. She feels a searing pain in the back of her head and sees the world go dark. When she awakens, she's been tied to a pole. Much to her relief and dismay, Pond Lily is beside her, tethered to a different pole. A village council is taking place, and they are at the center of it. After much shouting and angry words are exchanged, one person steps forward. Petalfall's stomach twists as she realizes it's none other than her mother. The girl has been nothing but an embarrassment to our family, and so I believe I know the proper, as well as most deserved punishment possible for her crimes against the village. I believe we should let them both go, and force them both into exile. Allow the wretched beast to get bigger and consume her for her idiocy. It will eventually start holding a grudge when she can no longer feed it. Her mother said this with a look of absolute disgust cast towards her. Mother, she mumbles as tears fall from her eyes. Pond Lily is unfortunately too young to be able to produce fire on cue. He has learned how to stop random outbursts, but it will be a while longer before he can make it at will. After a while longer of deliberations, they determine that the exact punishment her mother had decided for is the right course of action. She and her dragon are taken to the edge of the village. As she prepared to be thrown through the magic gateway in and out of the village, she noticed something odd about her mother. Her mother is smiling. However, it isn't the harsh or scheming smile that she expected. Instead, it's soft and warm, bordering on what she would call loving. When her mother realizes she's staring at her, she moves ever so slightly, and on the other side of her mother's overturned hand is one of Pond Lily's baby dragon scales. Her mother's warm smile broadens ever so slightly. That's why her mother had been bringing her extra food during her punishments. Her mother had known the whole time. Her mother had hidden their secret for years. She suddenly realized that punishments her mother had decided on wasn't to be as cruel as possible. She was trying to save her daughter's life, as well as the only grandchild she would ever get. With that realization, Petalfall straightened up her spine. She was not going to overlook the gift her mother had just given them. As she and her dragon were thrown out through the portal, she watched her mother fight not to sob. She only wished she had realized how much her mother loved her before it was too late to say anything. However, she would not risk her mother's safety by saying it now. After all, she was a traitor. The time has gone on for Petalfall and Pond Lily. The mountainside is definitely not nearly as safe as the village. Despite it all, the two have learned to adapt. They live in a small hut and have their very own tiny garden. She's still working on becoming a healer, and Pond Lily is her ever-faithful assistant. As she works on her next concoction, she feels the ground start to shake. This is new. This has never happened before. She hears the ground cracking. She shouts an order for Pond Lily to take to the sky through the window. He does exactly as he's told without question. Unfortunately, she's not so lucky. One of the support beams from the roof caves in, trapping her by the leg. By the time she is realizing what's happening, she's already being carried away by the mudslide. So the last thing she does is use as much magic as she can to put a protection spell on her child. With that, she loses consciousness. When she finally awakens, she recognizes nothing. There is no sign of her child anywhere. She spends the next 2 weeks searching for him, but her search ends in vain. The side of the mountain where they used to live is so unstable that it's not possible to build a home there again. In time, she ends up moving to a different mountain altogether. Not long after the mudslide, the mountain suffered a fairly fierce eruption. Without the protection of fairy magic, she lost everything again. So she decided it was time to move and leave old memories in the past. While she works on gathering herbs and food by foraging, she hears a sinister voice. Fairy. She recognizes that rumble anywhere. She barely has time to turn around as a giant red dragon launches itself towards her. She has no time to react in any other way than to flinch. Much to her shock, she doesn't feel instant pain, but she does hear a great deal of noise. As she opens her eyes, she realizes what's happened. The red dragon who had been charging her has been attacked by a different dragon. The other dragon rips a good portion of the scales off the red. Soon enough, the red dragon realizes he's outmatched and flees for his life. As the other dragon turns his attention towards her, Petalfall's fear builds. Suddenly, she recognizes those eyes all too well. Mom, I can't believe I found you. I looked for so long. I thought you were gone. The voice is different, but there is no doubt this is her child. Pond Lily. Before either one can say anything else, she rushes forward and wraps her arms around what is now a giant dragon. Oh, Pond Lily, she cries out. He holds his mother close and vows to never let her go again. After many tears and far too many hugs, he takes her back to his cave. Much to her surprise and delight, he's continued learning healing. His hoard is mostly made up of books about healing and medicine. I decided we could try to learn together, Mom. I know that dragons live a lot longer than fairies, so if we learn together, I can keep healing people for a long time after you're gone. I'll tell everyone who comes to me that I learned from the world's greatest healer, and that healing runs in our family, Pond Lily says, with a voice full of sincerity, as tears run down from his eyes. I love you too, Pond Lily. Yes, let's learn together. You are absolutely right. Healing does run in the family, and you, my son, are most definitely a part of that family, she says as she gives him another hard embrace. She happily spent the rest of her days living out this promise and learning everything she could with her son. When she finally passed away, he laid her to rest in his cave, near a beautiful cluster of glowing crystals she liked reading by. Patients of all kinds from all walks of life and all species came to see the dragon who could heal anything. He would always happily tell them with a tear in his eye, "I learned from the best healer that has ever lived. Her name was Petalfall, the most beautiful fairy to ever walk our earth inside and out. I am her son, and so there is no need for thanks. After all, healing runs in the family."